Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. Today we are going to be talking about electrophoresis. So what exactly is electrophoresis? So electrophoresis is the movement of charged particles in an electrolyte when subjected to an electric field. So this basically means that charged particles such as proteins which move towards the electric field. As proteins are some of the charged particles, it is mostly used in case of electrophoresis, and some of the sources of proteins include serum, urine, cerebrospinal fluid and other biological fluids. So moving on to the principle of electrophoresis, the basic principle involves the velocity of movement of particles in an electric field which is dependent upon the net charge of the molecule, that is denoted by Q, and the strength of electric field which is denoted by E. But it is also inversely proportional to the molecular weight. To elaborate more on this, the size of the particle, just imagine like say the particle is big, the rate of migration of the particle will be slower. However, the net charge of the molecule and the strength of the electric field is codependent. So say if it is positively charged, usually the molecules move across from negative to positive, that is from the anode to the cathode. If the particle is a positively charged, rate of migration would be faster. However, if the particle is heavier compared to a lighter particle, move slower. So depending on that, the principle is based depending on. Moving on to the theory of electrophoresis, it is basically dependent upon the movement of charged molecules in a medium subjected to an electric field, and this is denoted by V, which is the velocity of the molecule. So the movement of charged molecules in a medium, basically explains about the velocity of the molecule, which is the rate of the distance traveled by the charged molecule. So based on the equation as shown in the slides, it clearly mentions that velocity is directly proportional to the electric field and the net charge, as I mentioned earlier, and is inversely proportional to the frictional coefficient, which is dependent upon the mass and the shape of the molecule, which is also referred to as the molecular weight, as I mentioned earlier. So based on equation 1, as I told earlier, electrophoretic mobility, which is referred to as the rate of migration per unit field strength, can be determined, and this electrophoretic mobility is denoted by mu. So mu is directly proportional to the velocity and inversely proportional to the electric field strength. So to further derive this equation, mu can be classified as Q over F, that is mu is directly proportional to the net charge and is inversely proportional to the frictional coefficient. So to talk about certain factors which affect the electric field, the major factors which affect electrophoresis include the net electric charge of the molecule, the size and shape of the molecule, electric field strength, and pH of the medium, temperature of the operation, and the Mavic flow. So how does the net electric charge affect the electrophoresis? The net electric charge, so imagine if the electric charge is greater, so this may increase the rate of migration. If the electric charge is increased, that means it will increase the rate of migration based upon the molecular charge. Talk about the size and shape of the molecule. Depending on the size and shape, the molecular migration will depend upon it. So say if a molecule is larger, it needs to move across the electric field strength. It might take time because it is heavier. Depending upon the electric field strength, it may travel slower compared to a molecule which is smaller. So electric field strength itself is a factor. As I mentioned earlier, the electric charge of the molecule, the electric field strength, the electric charge of the molecule depends upon the electric field strength. So if the electric field strength is stronger, can the net electric charge of the molecule be pulled towards the electrode. So moving on to the pH of the medium, the buffer is more acidic. That would say that the buffer will have more H plus ions. So if there's more H plus ions, that means the buffer will be positively charged. So if the buffer is positively charged, there will be more positive ions. So if there's more positive ions, what will happen? If there's more positive ions, positively charged particles will move from the cathode to the anode, that is from positive to the negative electron. Similarly, if the buffer is if it's more basic, there will be less H plus ions, which means more OH minus ions. So if it's more OH minus ions, it will be more negatively charged. So negatively charged molecules will be higher in concentration. So that means the molecules will move from anode to the cathode, that is from negative to the positive. So temperature of the operation is also a major factor which plays a role in the electrophoresis technique. Say that a major current is applied. When current is increased in electrophoresis, resistance of the power supply will be reduced. So this may increase the temperature of the electrophoresis technique, which may lead to either evaporation of the buffer, or it may disturb the electrophoretic mobility. So stuff like that happens. So moving on to the wick flow, based on the wick width of the wick flow, sample migration is dependent upon the width of the wick flow. So if the wick is too thick, the sample will take time to migrate from. So moving on to the classifications, electrophoresis is majorly classified into three major classes, which is the technique, the position, and the dimension. So in technique, it is further classified into zone and moving boundary, followed by position, which is classified into horizontal and vertical, and then in dimension it is 1D, 2D and 3D. So to talk more about zone electrophoresis, it is a technique which produces zones which can be observed in a separated manner. So to talk more about this, it requires a supporting medium. So only if there's a supporting medium can the sample be migrated from one place to another. The supporting medium depends upon the type and structure of the medium used. So based on it, it can be classified as paper electrophoresis, gel electrophoresis, agarose electrophoresis, and page, which is also referred to as polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis. So moving on to the moving boundary electrophoresis, compared to zone electrophoresis, which required a supporting medium, in moving boundary, so it does not require a supporting medium. Instead, it is done in a freely moving solution. Based upon that, the electrophoresis which is mostly used, the type of technique is the capillary electrophoresis.
So the diagram below shows how capillary electrophoresis works. There are two valves, source valve and a destination valve. So this source valve contains fluorescently tagged DNA molecules. So these molecules move from the anode to the cathode through a capillary. So in between there is a detector present. So this detector detects each DNA molecule, and depending on the intensity, peaks are produced. This technique is mainly used in sequencing methods.
So moving on to the position of electrophoresis, it is majorly classified into horizontal and vertical. So in horizontal electrophoresis, its separation is based upon the charges of a molecule, which is based on the relative molecular size and charge. And the gel is present in a horizontal orientation and is submerged in a continuous buffer. However, in vertical electrophoresis, it is more complex compared to horizontal electrophoresis. The technique is done in a vertical manner, and this utilizes a discontinuous buffer compared to horizontal. So the function of horizontal electrophoresis is that it is used mostly in the separation of DNA and RNA mixtures, and sometimes even protein mixtures. But vertical electrophoresis mostly focuses on the separation of proteins only. So moving on to the dimensions of electrophoresis. 1D electrophoresis is the separation of proteins based upon the molecular weight over range of 10 to 300 kilodaltons, and the samples are usually weighed and dissolved in reagent called sodium dodecyl sulfate, which is also referred to as SDS. So it is a one-way process compared to 2D electrophoresis. In 2D electrophoresis, this is an essential tool for separation and fractionation of a complex protein mixtures from biological samples. So in 1D, we saw that it only separates the samples, but in 2D, there is separation and fractionation of complex proteins. So say that the samples have been separated, as shown in the image on the right. The samples have been separated, but who knows that all the samples have been separated like accordingly. Some samples could be accumulated together and they could have formed a clump, but we wouldn't have known that. So in order to know that, we need to use 2D electrophoresis in order to determine the sample separation. So this depends upon two factors, that is isoelectric point and isoelectric focusing. So isoelectric point refers to the pH at which the molecule has no electric charge. That means the net charge is zero and does not migrate with electric field. However, isoelectric focusing refers to the improvisation of resolution of electrophoresis. pH gradient is maintained between the electrodes in order to improvise the resolution of electrophoresis. Moving on to 3D electrophoresis, it is a protein analysis in a separation medium that extends substantially in three spatial dimensions. In 1D, we saw that it only requires separation, but in 2D, we saw that it requires both separation and fractionation, and in 3, it requires three dimensions. So, as the name suggests, the dimensions are dependent upon the what you're going to look into. So 1D it does not go into very much deep into the samples, but 3D it goes very much further into what you're going to see. So one example of 3D electrophoresis is say that you want to check for what type of antibodies you need to identify. So say you want IgG antibody, but you don't know what type of antibody it is. You just know that it is an antibody. So in order to determine what type of antibody it is, you need to perform 3D electrophoresis. So 3D electrophoresis is dependent upon three major parameters, that is native size of the sample, the isoelectric point, and the molecular weight. So based on these three parameters, the molecule of interest can be identified and obtained. So say that you want to identify IgG antibody, 3D electrophoresis is performed and the structure of the antibody is obtained based upon the three parameters as I mentioned earlier. So based on that, the structure of the antibody can be determined, and by that your molecule of interest, that is your antibody of interest, that is IgG, can be observed and determined.
Hey guys, I hope you learned something on today's video, and on our next video we'll be covering on instrumentation, reagents and applications. And also, if you had any questions on today's video, feel free to drop it in the comment section, and please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching guys.